Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Emenduri, and I'm joined with a returning guest, a favorite here, someone who I'm super grateful for to come on the show and to share his thoughts with us today. Oil traded negative for the May contracts yesterday, and it's a real testament to what is going on in our economy. May contracts literally sold for 40 cents a gallon to the buyer. They were paid out. The buyer was paid 40 cents a gallon to take this oil off of the market. And I think that's a sign of what it's like when the markets come to an absolute grind and oil becomes a liability. And so many things are surfacing. Disney announced laying off 100,000 employees to save $500 million a month. In what are truly devastating times, we have honestly one of the most positive people in the space. We're going to be talking about cryptocurrency, how Bitcoin, Ethereum will fare in these testing times, because I think that's what this is. This is going to be a real stress test for gold and silver, for Bitcoin, for the cryptocurrencies, and for us as individuals. So Omar Bahn of Crypto's News. His YouTube channel is CryptO, the O being a 0. Omar, thank you so much for coming on the show with me today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Kenneth. As you know, I've watched your channel for a very long time. I think you have excellent interviews. You have great content. And like you're talking about with your introduction, you're obviously paying attention to these markets on a daily basis. So I appreciate someone like yourself having me on, who I respect so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Well, one of the things I've been doing with my interviews lately is just asking, how are you doing under the circumstances? Because this is a situation that is, in so many things, are unforeseen. I mean, how many people thought that oil could go negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of things are surfacing. So before we get into it, how are you? How are things going? And, just start there.
It's like you said, I'm extremely optimistic. So I think I'm still trying to come to terms, like most people, with the gravity of the situation is, and how that unfolds over the next months or years, how that's going to impact me. But for me personally, just to be completely clear, I moved from Vegas because I was living in Los Angeles. And the first place I lived was relatively cheap when I moved from Miami. It was like, I think like $1,200 a month or $1,800, something like that. Second place was $4,600 a month because it was the height of the crypto markets. Everything was wild. And that was the cheapest property in the area near the airport, since I was traveling so much, that I could actually find $4,800, which was insane considering the person who bought the house, my landlord, bought it in the year 2000 for $200,000. And he had it worth, when I checked online, $1 million by that point, which was probably around 2017. So wild earnings to have been buying real estate. And I think those opportunities are going to come again, but we don't know what the bottom is. So I'm one of those people, like we need to assess where we're at right now, figure out our personal financial situation, and make do how we can. So for myself, I position a lot in crypto. As you know, most of my wealth is still in crypto and gold at this point. Crypto earnings my holdings have fallen a lot because I'm one of those hodlers. And I did that primarily because I did, like yourself, anticipate a huge market correction. And so my bet was on the risk reward of something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, because the risk was really losing all of it, right? So going to zero, certainly not negative like oil, but going to zero, whereas the reward could have potentially been much greater if we saw something like a crash. But I think the problem that I had was in thinking that the crash would happen at the same time as the hyperinflation. What we're seeing right now instead is this deflationary event. So that's what articles are talking about today. They're talking about oil just being just this illustration of what this global deflation is happening with markets around the world, which I don't think many of us could have foreseen. So I've moved to Vegas. It's much nicer here. It's much cheaper. The place is probably bigger than the last place where I was there. I was living there and I was paying like $2,400 a month. I pay substantially less than that here, probably half of that. And I have beautiful view. I can see the strip from my house. And at this point, it's a matter of just looking at my assets. What's going on with ads? Because as I was talking to you before, YouTube Google rather is saying that there are less advertisers spending money right now, which is normally the case in the beginning of the year. But now with this crisis, obviously that's one of the first things a business cuts back on, which is marketing, before the layoffs, even in some cases, especially if there's going to be a dropping demand. So that's going to be dropping. You have to consider how people are going to be spending their money. They might not be buying your newsletters. They might not be that willing to spare cash for super chats or crypto donations and all of that. So for me, I'm just thinking, man, I'm going to have to go back to making 3-4 videos a day like I used to do, and trying to find out my situation, what I can do actionably to stay solvent. Because for myself, I know I'm good for a few months, but certainly not beyond a year in my current situation, because of just the way YouTube works. And I dropped my job to basically do this full time. So now it's like hammer down, read Think and Grow Rich again, read How to Win Friends and Influence People, read all the good books, get inspired, motivated, and find what's actionable. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to go through this unaffected. And I was telling you personally some stuff prior to this. But, one thing that I will mention is, the FANG stocks have actually done really well, right? We had Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and they've fared well so far with everyone being home, everyone on Facebook, everyone buying things on Amazon now, as opposed to going to the stores, watching Netflix now, binging on Netflix. But the fallout of this shutdown, this economic shutdown, is going to have ripple effects where people are just going to be poorer. They're not going to spend as much. And I feel like that's where the next leg down is going to be, is in the tech sector. Maybe something else comes up, but I really feel like that's going to be the next hit for the economy, is the tech sector. And just like you're talking about, people spending less on Google and marketing and ads. So, let's talk about the coronavirus for a little bit. You're in the news all the time, seeing things. I feel like there was so many things that need to be settled. The chips needed to be settled in terms of how bad the coronavirus is. Obviously not something to completely scoff at, but I don't know if the 2 million projection number that they anticipated if we did nothing is true either. And I almost wonder if that was a lie that was spread for tyranny to basically take place, where they say, hey, you need to be locked up in your house. And almost going down a conspiratorial rabbit hole, if this is some sort of test run for, what they could potentially do in the future as, more and more centralized control starts to take over our world. The whole world was shut down. And that, to me, it was a very odd thing. And then you start to realize, scientists are battling, and doctors, there's holistic doctors that are having almost 100% success rates in terms of treating COVID-19. So any sort of truth start to stand out to you as we have gone through this pandemic, this crisis, and this overall economic lockdown?
Yeah, I don't want to get too political, of course, because it's a very heated debate. And I try to follow both sides of it. One being that everything we're hearing is truthful and that the models are following the most accurate statistics. And the other, of course, being the complete opposite end of that, which is David Icke's interview, and trying to frame that for my again own actionable things. So I'm not an expert, of course. That's just a general disclaimer. But I read pretty much everything I can about what's happening, and so it's just that quote that comes to mind in relation to what you said, which is never let a good crisis go to waste. And so, for example, today Trump decided, or actually rather last night, that he was going to ban immigration into the United States, which was something that he had wanted to do for a very long time. So all visas, except for the most essential of visas, whatever that might be, will be banned, or work visas meaning that people cannot come to get educated as well, probably from overseas. I remember working in the hotel industry in Miami Beach, and we had many of the staff come and basically give away their work for borderline free, because they would come on a school visa to work, since in the Philippines, for example, and in Indonesia and Bali, they have such a strong tourist industry out there that it's basically the main industry, hospitality. They come to the United States, they work in the hotels, and then they go back after a year or two. So I just think about the ripple effects that will have on the luxury hotel industry, which is a high-end industry, when they have to actually pay people full-time to staff these hotels. And obviously to the families of those like in the Philippines who now they have nothing to look forward to. And that's the case even here in the United States, where education has been basically stalled. You know, your plans are put on hold. Whatever it was is put on hold at this point, and you're trying to reassess while sitting under quarantine what direction your life is going to take. What is this new reality? And sadly, some people are slow on the uptick. What I do know is that we are seeing huge economic implications. It's not being let to go to waste. For example, I think the best thing of that David Icke interview that I took away for sure was the 5G rollouts, that this is a great opportunity to roll out 5G, which is something that they've wanted to do, whether you think it's medically good or bad, but to take advantage of everyone being at home, to go into these schools and to go into these locations that are normally crowded, to put these things up. Fantastic, if that was my plan. So I think it's certainly benefiting certain individuals more than others, certain politicians, and the regulations they've wanted to have, and their ability to control the narrative. I mean, like these Trump talks where he goes on and talks every single day for like hours. It's become almost a press conference where he can try to make himself look good for the next election. But you tell me, Kenneth, is it possible that we could even stall these elections if we have some sort of martial law or war, where I'm thinking he could stay president interminably? Under these conditions that we're seeing, it seems like the Constitution has been put on hold, which is certainly, I mean, the right to assemble, obviously, that can't happen. The right to freedom of speech is difficult when corporations control the outlets where we communicate the most on, being YouTube, where you can't talk about sensitive or controversial topics. But this topic, you said the word earlier, the CV word, and I commend you, your bravery for saying that. I try not to, because I realize that they might censor me by way of demonetization, or other YouTubers who have had their channels completely erased and deleted recently. So we don't have freedom of speech is what I'm saying. We don't have freedom of assembly, the right to bear arms. They shut down gun stores in some areas too. I heard they started to do that because of the V, the big V. So the Constitution is put on hold. Our freedoms are definitely put on hold. I'm one person who does take precautions just in case this virus is quite serious, because the data is still coming in. I wear my N95 masks. I had some from before this went down, which is nice, since Home Depot isn't selling them anymore to regular people. They're recommending cloth masks. I've been wearing N95s since way before the CDC recommended them, because I don't trust them. I think their data is lagging, and that's the big problem. Is that I would tell my own brother, and not to put him on blast here, like, hey, I'm going to be wearing this mask. And he says, don't even bother. This is before they recommend the cloth masks, because just go to the CDC site. Stop looking at that conspiratorial stuff. Like, none of that is real. Look at the government. I'm like, oh my God, dude, you drank too much of the Kool-Aid, my man. So it is important to stay informed and get ahead of the curve that the government is tracking, because they see this as a movement, even if you think that they're completely beneficial to humanity here and their states and nation states. They're doing this for the greater good of all, or so they believe, right? But that doesn't mean for the greater good of you. And I think that's something to consider, when really it's what Governor Cuomo of New York said. We're kind of on our own here. That's what he said at the height of his own peak in his state.
Yeah. I think there's, and it's funny, not funny. I mean, we're in a situation now where the conspiracies are like front and center. We're living in a world of like a new reality.
Yeah.
Things that we were talking about before, like the bubble and, things crashing, now it's front and center. I mean, people are waking up to how this is not normal. Yeah. The oil was super telling yesterday. Seeing a negative number for oil, I think that revealed a lot of things. And, things like gold and silver, Bitcoin, maybe seemed like conspiracies a few months ago to some people. Now this is starting to really ramp up. And so I'd like to actually talk to you a little bit about that. Your thoughts on gold and silver in this environment. I know you focus on cryptocurrencies, but I'd like to get your thoughts on gold and silver before we shift over.
That's, to me, my ultimate safe haven. That's what I'm looking at sitting there, and I hold physical. And I look at it and I think, that's my last that's my last vestige for sure of hope, at least during this period where cryptocurrencies are rather uncertain. They seem to be following the market correlation, and I definitely want to tie that into gold and silver, but correlation to the stock market has usually been very, very low. But I think that was when times weren't being tested. Whereas now it's being tested. A lot of people who hold are retail investors. And I think a lot of the shakeout we've seen is retail investors getting weeded out of these markets, despite the fact that you might hear that on ramps and off ramps have become just ubiquitous, and it's so much easier now to do so. I actually would push back a bit against that, because KYC requirements, AML requirements have made it so much more difficult for the average person to get into it. Uncertainties around taxes. I think one of the strengths of cryptocurrencies was being able to spend it, and that has come under attack. Regardless of everything else, scalability, I think taxes and regulations affected the ability to spend it more than anything else, which takes away one of the strong networks effect of it. So I would like to see a resurgence of that. But certainly we know that the regulators aren't keen to let something just run free like stable coins, which they've recently come attacking against. Ultimately, they've managed to affect gold and silver, I think, with the COMEX market, like everyone else. I think Peter Schiff had a good point yesterday when he talked about how what we saw with oil could easily happen with gold, but kind of the reverse, where you had these traders who couldn't accept delivery in Cushing, Oklahoma of the oil. They didn't have 5 tankers to drive over to Cushing to plug into the pipeline and actually get the oil delivered, so they had to offload these contracts quickly, and oftentimes we're paying people up to $40 below the contract just to get rid of it so they wouldn't get sued if they weren't able to accept delivery of that oil. Astounding. But I think with gold, I mean, it's very easy to store. That's a good point he had to say. You can keep quite a lot of it in your house, unlike oil, and storage of it is not difficult. It's not a very difficult material to store, of course. And the same thing. So my point being that if enough people demand delivery there from the markets, they begin to do so, you could see a decoupling of the contract price from the physical reality of spot price, something like we're also seeing with oil right now. But instead of kind of continuing a downward trajectory like oil, that would take gold, because of demand we're seeing, which has been climbing. I'm sure you followed in the physical markets. If you try to find gold right now, it's selling for quite a premium, and silver as well, in places like eBay. It could take it, much, much higher. So that's a nice thing to be looking forward to, of course. But the question, of course, is can you stay solvent while the market does its thing? What kind of timeline are we on right now? Housing is something else. I was following more yesterday, thinking about the Vegas market out here. I'm still renting, as you know. I didn't want to buy a property. I deeply considered it, but I felt like housing could be something that was impacted because of this. And I think that's something we have yet to see. It's going to be the next big one. I think besides some of these commodities we're seeing, I think once people start having issues with their rents, we haven't heard about anything in paper that's passed that's going to give stimulus directly to Americans besides the $1,200 check that many of us haven't seen still. But I think after that runs out, what do you do? How do you pay your rent? How do you pay your mortgage, rather? And how many people will put their homes for sale just to be, or I heard about this new kind of structure that involves kind of taking some of the equity in your house and creating shares of your house and giving that to a corporation. I forgot what the exact word for that is. So basically you get a loan almost, but you have to pay kind of dividends to the corporation as a piece of your kind of mortgage. The corporation helps you with the mortgage, but you owe them. And at the end of the day, now you're not the only one owning your mortgage. There's a corporation owning it. So what we're seeing is the Fed is owning everything. They're the biggest holder of mortgages right now. I think ultimately some of these corporations will be big winners here. And the big loser here is the middle class, of course, that's getting hit right now. So yeah, that's just some thoughts there. I think it's phenomenal, just historically, to follow it and to see everything we've talked about, Kenneth, for years kind of playing out, and not necessarily always the way we expected it to, is just fascinating, economically speaking, and scholarly speaking, to think about how this plays out. But none of us lived through the Great Depression. Most of us didn't. I think there are a few people alive who lived through the Great Depression, but they probably don't remember much, especially since our memories are so fickle and so easy to manipulate.
They'd have been really little.
They'd have been really little too, of course, just hearsay. So uh, I don't know, Kenneth. I don't know.
Let's touch on Bitcoin and Ethereum, kind of the more higher level cryptocurrencies here. We got the 20 days away from the halving for Bitcoin, so that's super positive in terms of quantitative hardening. I heard that term from Jimmy Song. I don't know who coined it,
Yeah.
which I thought was so powerful when it comes to sound money. But we are going to see a true stress test when it comes to cryptocurrencies in this environment, in this deleveraging environment. Are people going to be able to hold on to this, or will it just be something that people are able to sell to pay their bills? And that could be what it is. Or does all this trillions of dollars that are being printed go into cryptocurrencies? And does it prove itself to be more resilient, and that instilling of confidence that it's constantly getting year after year through this? Obviously, Bitcoin going from about $9,000 range to below 5,000. That was hard hitting for a lot of people. I think a lot of people had to sell. Obviously, we're selling through that, but to see it creep back here, Ethereum as well, I think there's a lot of confidence being shown in that. So I'll let you have it from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of different timelines to think about there, which is, of course, the short term, there's the medium term and the long term. So the short term, and I'll start with that and then kind of zoom out, is uncertain just because we have the halving coming up very soon. And miners are such a small actually share of the market, unlike back in 2016 or prior halvings where the block reward gets cut in half. Now it's down to 12.5 and it's going to drop to 6.25 in just a matter of like 2 weeks. It's gonna get cut in half. So you would think that there would be less Bitcoin supply that's being sold by these miners, because it would be less that's actually printed or inflated. I like that term, by the way, quantitative hardening. That's a good one. I'm gonna keep that one. So I think it is a buy the rumor, sell the news. So the thing is, we did have you could say a little bit of a sell-off this past week. Some of the traders are saying that this was the sell-off prior to the halving right now. The buy the rumor, sell the news event was this. I'm not sure about that. We've seen that Bitcoin has been trading in a range kind of between around 6,600 and 7,200. And it's been very tight. And it's something they're talking about even with the stock market, where it's in this kind of limbo. It's in this purgatory. So I think Bitcoin is also kind of following that right now. Will there be a sell-off? I think it's possible we still do get that sell-off, but maybe this larger sell-off, like you said, that took us below 5,000, did we weed out a lot of these retail investors who did sell at that point, and they would be the most likely to sell, not the institutions, the corporations who are thinking longer term. They have teams that invest in this, and their basis for investing in this hasn't changed. Ethereum 2.0 coming out soon. They launched a test net 3 days ago, the Topaz test net, 20,000 stakers already almost. That's insane. I mean, that shows that there's a lot of excitement for that. I think that the losers here are the retail investors who have been weeded out, because I think this is when the institutions begin buying a lot, like Grayscale, one of the biggest companies in this space. They had about $1 billion of inflows into their company over the last year, which is phenomenal for a cryptocurrency company. And they hold about over 2% of the total Bitcoin existence now. And they have the best alternative asset, as you know, to track the price of Bitcoin. That's kind of like an ETF, the GBTC. They also have ETHE, which is the Ethereum Investment Trust. And these each took about, I think, 74% of the money that they took in went into Bitcoin, and about 24% went into Ethereum. The rest went into smaller cap coins, less than 1%. But it showed that there's an extreme amount of interest. And this was primarily from institutions. I think over 80% of that money came from institutions, not the average person. So it shows that they're obviously interested in buying these things, and they're buying it cheap. I think one of the best things that could happen is Ethereum going back down to $10 when I think I started taking a stake in it, because you would be able to get that stake, no pun intended, in Ethereum 2.0, where you need 32 ETH in order to stake. I don't have my calculator right now to run the numbers, but it's a lot more expensive when you're looking at the economic environment for a lot of people to pick up those 32 ETH, when it's not a sure bet. It's still a risk and a gamble, and they need to have food on the table at the end of the day, and many of whom are still paying their rent. So I think if it would drop lower, that would be great for staking, great for decentralization. The higher it goes, the better for the institutions, of course. But I think to tie into what you said earlier is that I think in the long term, this does play out really well, where I think there will be ultimately stimulus for people and more trillions of dollars put into actual people's pockets. And they're going to say, I'm seeing the inflation now. I'm seeing the consumer prices rising. I'm noticing that I have less than I had before this entire crisis. I'm going to find out what went wrong. And Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think those roads absolutely lead you in those directions, at least to Bitcoin at first. So in the long run, I think that extra money is going to be seeing its way heavily, first from institutions and then from retail folks who might have missed a majority of the run by that point, which I think could follow shortly after the halving through that year. I think they'll have missed the opportunity of a lifetime, which is why I follow this so closely. It is the opportunity, and it's still here right now.
That's powerful. Omar, I don't know if I'm sure you saw the news. The Bank of America new price target for gold, $3,000, up from $2,000. Yeah. So it was $2,000 for the next 18 months. The Bank of America projection is now $3,000. So, I mean, a massive change. And, and I think that's what and I think it's good news for gold, because obviously they don't want to be so far wrong, right? So far off in the wrong direction. And I think a lot of times these big institutions have to give in to the fact that, this is likely where things are headed, That's one angle to see this. And I mean, there's obviously, maybe they're just trying to dupe people into buying for them to sell. I don't know. There's also that as well. But, I think that's positive for gold. I think that's positive for silver. And I think that's positive for cryptocurrencies indirectly. So, I mean, maybe give us some closing thoughts here. And of course, let people know, if people visit your website, your YouTube channel, what they can expect to find, what they can expect to hear, and, all the good things that you put out on a regular basis.
Yeah. So closing thoughts is just that: stay hungry. Don't believe any one source, because they might just be listening to one source, which might have made a bogus lie. Like apparently the protests that started in Maryland were created by one. I covered this yesterday in my news. It was a Reddit post put out over the weekend that talked about how these protests sprung up from one source that registered the sites that all kind of created these liberate movements, had the exact same descriptions, the DNS registrations, the registration for the websites were all pretty much the same. So there's going to be, I think, some good amount of astroturfing here, people taking advantage of the situation, whether politically, some think that was done politically, and others think it might be to try to sell masks or do any of these sorts of scams and so on. So there's going to be a lot of scams and a lot of misinformation, a lot of BS out there. Just think for yourself above all. Still educate yourself. Listen to people like Kenneth Amadori. I listen to a broad range, many of which economically. So I listen to channels like Peter Schiff, of course. Love him or hate him. I listen to Money GPS. I think he covers a lot of this. Greg Manarino. I mean, there's a lot of great sources out there. Try to mix it up every now and a while to just get a broad range of the markets. Follow oil, of course. That's the story now. Follow real estate. Follow precious metals, follow cryptocurrencies. There's going to be some wild opportunities that are springing up by the day here. I'm sure there are some that exist just because of oil, like what you're seeing with the ETF right now, which is finally trading down. I said yesterday on my channel, it might be interesting to short USO today because of the fact that you saw these contracts selling off. And that could bleed over into the ETF market once people woke up. And you notice that most people buying these ETFs, this US oil tracking ETF, most people buying it, if you looked at Reddit, which is a great source, were retail people like, oh, I know better than the market. I am a genius. It's selling off, so I'm going to buy. But this is a different environment. So generally, you want to go against the crowd. So just continue to think for yourself. I would love to be a part of your information. So I cover mostly cryptocurrencies. Obviously, I'm reaching outside of that, talking about the virus, talking about the economy in other segments as well. But I continue to do that Monday through Friday. I try to put out throughout the week at least 5 videos and do interviews wherever possible to keep people informed and bring my experience, having done this since June 2016, one of the first crypto YouTubers doing this, because I felt like there was a huge void in the market. There's a lot out there now, and I continue to get inspired by other YouTubers to make better content. So yeah, I continue to try to make it better for my viewers. I would love to have you. Thanks so much, Kenneth, for having me. You can find my stuff at CryptO, like Kenneth said, well, CRYPT0. Some people think it's Crypt Zero, but it's CRYPT0. And I will look forward to meeting some of you out there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, my friend. BYOB, be your own bank. Love it. And we will talk very, very soon.
Yeah, thank you. All the best, man. Bye-bye, everybody.